no adult has any right to lie to a child like that. It's dangerous.
That's the voice of Chloe Cole, a courageous 18-year-old woman who is speaking out about how the healthcare industry is pushing kids into damaging sex change experiments. Today, we're going to hear the rest of her story, as well as an update on her lawsuit against Kaiser Permanente. Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candy Cushman, with our special guest, Chloe Cole. Well, welcome everybody. I'm glad to be back with Chloe Cole for the second part of this series. Chloe, thanks for joining us for another segment.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
It's been a wonderful conversation. Just thank you for opening up your heart, just being who you really are. So I'm looking forward to continuing the rest of this story today. But first, we're going to start out with some fun conversation, get to know you a little bit better again. And I thought it would be fun to do a rapid fire question on your favorite things. So you ready?
Yeah.
Favorite color?
That's a hard one.
We're not doing rapid fire, Chloe.
You see, I'm not a rapid fire type of person.
That's
I
true.
like getting in depth.
You are a processor.
It's more about how colors are coordinated rather than an individual color, you know?
All right, that is such a creative perspective right there. So it depends on what color is coordinating with what.
Yes.
All right, what are your favorite color combinations?
Maybe like pink and blue, which kind of sucks because it's like the trans flag colors, the toothpaste flag colors.
That's okay. We can reclaim pink and blue.
Yes. I also like stuff that's like holographic.
Yeah. What does that mean exactly?
How do I put this? Like it kind of like if you move it, then like it reflects differently. Light reflects like different
prism,
colors. Yeah.
Okay, fun. All
like
right.
opal.
Favorite sport?
Rollerblading.
Oh, cool. I didn't expect that. So you do that in California?
Yeah. I mean, I can't like do any tricks or anything like that. I kind of just do it as like a casual thing, just like listen to music and enjoy myself.
Okay. All right. Favorite fashion, since you mentioned you like fashion?
Well, I'll probably get into a little bit more into this later, but I really like stuff that's like, right now I like stuff that's very future oriented, or like technology oriented.
Kind of mod?
Yeah, mod. I don't know what that means.
Like modern as opposed to traditional, yeah.
You can consider it modern, yeah.
All right, we're getting the generation gap here. So describe your fashion, kind of what you're talking about.
Well, fashion has actually been kind of a big part of my detransition and just like the journey back from trying to present myself as a boy, and also like it's kind of giving me something to focus on, you know, something to build.
Yeah.
And I've kind of switched between like different aesthetics over like the past 2 years, kind of rapidly. Like at first I was going for something like very girly, very, very feminine, and I've been experimenting a little bit more, and I think I've kind of found something that I'll stick with, because there is like an actual philosophy around it, and I do want to create a brand of my own.
One last question. We know you've traveled to at least 20 states, right?
I've lost count.
Yeah.
It's somewhere around there.
We want to hear your favorite state and your least favorite state, your worst state. And I think there's been some lobbying from staff about certain states, so just ignore all that. And your true opinion.
Well, I think my most favorite and least favorite state has to be just one state, and that's California, because it's home, you know?
Yeah.
Like, all my family's there. I grew up there.
Yeah.
And it's so beautiful and so varied. Like, there's so many different biomes, so many different people and places to explore there. But someday it's probably not going to be home anymore, you know, because we've got all the crazy politics and social issues and all the homeless, and it's getting expensive. Like, it's slowly becoming more and more unlivable.
And I saw the number of kids coming out as trans is astronomically higher in California alone.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the heart of this.
Yeah.
But since it is a big state, like, we have all that influence, and it's spreading all across the U.S. Like, a lot of people think, like, oh, it's just a California thing. Like, this will never happen to my kids or in my community. But it's everywhere, and it's actually even worse in, like, some of the deep red states than it is in, like, certain areas of California.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah,
I said in last week, I didn't even learn. I never encountered anything about this, about transitioning or the LGBT or anything like that in class. Having graduated last year, it was never even brought up. But they're teaching some of this. Like, they're introducing like pornographic books into schools, into like communities in rural Tennessee.
and we can see the real results of that because there are now thousands of kids. There are thousands of people that just jumped just in the last few years identifying as LGBTQ. And it's pretty significant, the radical jump, when you look at the stats. What do you think about that, Chloe? The fact that it has really almost become an epidemic among youth, and it's really hitting girls hard. You see that it's more girls identifying as trans. Why do you think we're seeing that jump and it's hitting girls so hard?
It's not hard to see why. I mean, a lot of those girls have like sexual trauma, were like victims of sexual abuse or assault or stalking. A lot of them have body image issues and hate their breasts, their hips, either because they feel like they're developing too soon, too young, or because they feel like they're not developed enough because they're not catching up with their peers. And a lot of them are late bloomers. A lot of them feel like they just can't be feminine enough to be a girl. And there's definitely a social contagion aspect to it. It's absolutely an epidemic, as you've described it. That's largely where this is being perpetuated. That's where it came from for me.
Let's start with, for this segment, your journey toward transitioning, because last week we really covered how you reached the point of identifying as a male. But I'd really like for our audience to hear how you started that journey toward walking out of that, toward detransitioning. How did it begin for you when you began to realize this is not a healthy place for me, and I think I want to actually embrace how I was created as a woman and maybe even have kids one day?
Well, I actually started to get worse the further I got into my transition. And while I wasn't suicidal before I started to transition, I think like the stress of socially transitioning and of taking extremely high doses of androgens as a biological female really started to weigh down on me. And it made it so that, I mean, I couldn't even focus my studies. Like, my grades started to suffer. Eventually, I started experiencing suicidal thoughts, and I was diagnosed with major depressive disorder, which they started medicating me for, using an off-label medication called Wellbutrin, which also sucked and also made me worse. But it wasn't until after my surgery that I started to realize, like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. That's when the negative feelings around transitioning specifically started to really come in. And I think that's because it was such a shock to my system. It really woke me up just to how brutal this was on my body. At first, I was pretty satisfied with my mastectomy. And that was pretty early in.
Let me back up a little bit. I want to hear more detail about this process. So let's start at the beginning there. And let me just say to parents, we are going to get into some medical details here. So if you have little ones around and you want to be sensitive to that, now's maybe a good time to put them in a different place, because we're going to get into some of the raw parts of this. So Chloe, what happened first? So it started with hormone blockers, or what was
puberty
the first?
blockers, okay. Which the actual medication is called Lupron. It like blocks the production of sex hormones in the body.
Okay.
And then I was put on testosterone in injectable form. And I took an injection in the arm every week. It was subcutaneous, meaning that like it was injected into the fat. And so I actually had my mom help me with this because I was pretty queasy whenever we did this. Like it took a while for me to get used to it, and I couldn't really bear the thought of doing it on my own. So like every week we'd alternate between arms, like pinch out like a little area of fat just to create like a little bubble for the gel to go into and be absorbed into my body.
And this is 12? Like the injections begin at
13.
what age? 13.
13. I was about midway through my 8th grade year.
At age 15, double mastectomy. How do you get from injections to having your breasts removed?
So after I was diagnosed with depression, I also started getting really sick of having to wear a binder every day, which for those of you who don't know what a binder is, it kind of looks like a tank top. It comes in either like full body or half body. And in the chest area, there's like a compression fabric it's used by like males with gynecomastia or women who are like cross-dressing or like playing a role or like doing like their drag kings. And more recently by trans-identified females.
So you started wearing the chest binder?
No, I started wearing it when I was about 13.
Okay.
After I started testosterone.
And then, so how do you get to where you just want to remove them completely?
Well, I knew that I thought that I wanted to do that from a pretty early point in my transition. But I was just going with I was just binding for a few years, and it was uncomfortable because it is like a tight garment, and I had the appropriate size and everything, but it was super uncomfortable. Like it would stick to me while like I was working out or like swimming.
Were there complications from just that?
At the time, I didn't think so because I wasn't getting like any pain from it. Like a lot of the other girls I interacted with who used one, they'd get like upper back pains, like shoulder pains, chest pains, rib pains, and such. I never got anything like that. It fit me like a glove, so I didn't think there was anything wrong. But it actually deformed my ribs a little bit. They kind of flare out a little bit just at the bottom.
Well, what I remember from hearing you share your story at the Virginia Beach press conference was that, you just had a relatively small amount of, I guess, counseling session or something before they rushed you into these procedures.
Oh, it was pathetic.
Tell me about that.
It was about like 6 months between my initial gender dysphoria diagnosis and actually being put on blockers, and then a month between being put on blockers and my first testosterone shot, and about 2 years of taking testosterone before I got my mastectomy.
So how much conversation is there for you to prepare for actually removing your female organs?
Not
body
enough.
parts, I should say.
Not enough. And really, no matter how much information you give a kid on this,
kid, 15.
They're not going to be able to really conceptualize all of it, how it's going to affect them in the short term, in the long term, like the possibility that they might regret it, and all the potential complications that can come from it. Most of the complications that I'm experiencing today were not even listed on my forms, and I had no idea that there were a possibility.
And you said, the thing that really struck me is you said you had not even had sex education when you're doing these medical procedures.
I mean, I did, but it was pretty bare bones. And when I was 13, I had like a few more classes to go. Yeah. I hadn't even had sex ed that year yet. It was at the very end of the year. And I didn't know what like all the organs in the female reproductive tract, which they also didn't teach me in school. I learned that from the internet, from a meme, which is an entirely different story. But
so at 13, 15, you don't even know, you didn't understand at that age what your organs were, where they are, and yet
I didn't even know what ovulation was. I didn't know that was a thing. All I knew was like, oh, there's a period, and then somehow like at some point you can get pregnant when you're not on your period. And yet, I didn't know that there were four stages in the menstrual cycle.
So I find that just incredible that they would rush you down this medical path without you even, as a child, understanding that basic knowledge. Yeah.
I mean, not to mention I was hardly physically developed either. Like I started puberty fairly young. I was 9, so I was about like 4 years into puberty. But, my periods weren't even regulated yet. Like I was only having about like one every 3 to 4 months. I think I'd only been having them for about like a year or so by the time that I started on blockers.
Well, Chloe, you've made some really strong statements about the fact that no child under 18 should be pushed into these procedures. Tell me why you're so passionate about that.
I mean, it's pretty obvious why. Like, kids, they don't really have very much knowledge or experience of the world, and no matter how much they know, they're not developed enough to make decisions around such things. Like it takes a lot of experience and I think a completely developed brain to, and like just a few years living in the world, like some time to introspect, like maybe whether you want to have children or a family one day, because this is something that's going to take away your ability to have natural children for the rest of your life.
And you went even further than that. You said it shouldn't even be considered an option.
No, not for kids. It's dangerous to do this to kids because, like I said, they can't really fully appreciate the risks and benefits that could come from this, and they're still developing physically, psychologically, sexually, and you can't just stop a natural process like puberty. Like, it's not just the sex organs and secondary sex characteristics that appear during puberty. There's also like a lot of brain development and development of other organs. So it's really dangerous.
And I've seen also other statistics that show that if kids are allowed to progress along their natural development, if they're experiencing gender confusion, they feel like they want to identify as different than the sex they were born with, but if they're allowed to continue their natural development into puberty, I'm seeing stats over the last few years showing that, I mean, big percentages, 60, 80, even 90%, if they're allowed to progress naturally, do embrace their God-given biological gender, sex. What's going on with that? That even though you have those facts, those science, they're being ignored by the medical community.
Right. So historically, children have tended to outgrow their gender dysphoria by the time that they're finished with puberty. A lot of activists will say, like, oh, those are outdated studies from a few decades ago. Like, the new studies, they show that most children go on to transition, but it doesn't really take into account the fact that, well, we have, like, a different culture around this now, and there's more, like, a social pressure to undergo this. And back then, it was more like a niche thing that wasn't, well, of course it wasn't like as accepted as it is now, but it also wasn't pushed as much. And these kids now, their parents are being told to affirm their identity, and many of them have already gone on like puberty blockers. So like as soon as you start any of that basically guarantees that your kid is going to move on to transitioning.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I mean, once a kid's started on puberty suppressants, or even once they start being affirmed and start like trying to follow the lifestyle of the opposite sex, there's basically a sunk cost fallacy in that, like either socially or like medically, like, well, you've already started this, like you've already changed this part of your life, and it's going to be difficult and possibly humiliating to try and go back. There's a lot of pressure there.
And yet you had the courage to go back. What gave you the courage to take that bold step?
Well, after my mastectomy, the regret just slowly started to come in. At first, it was about my changed appearance from the hormones and the changes to my body and looking more masculine. And also just like the difficulties of feeling like a male role in socialization. It was quite lonely for me in my experience. I felt like I was trapped because, well, I guess in more than one way I felt trapped. Like as a guy, like I couldn't like wear makeup or like be as expressive in a lot of ways, and I felt like a lot of time I couldn't even talk about like a lot of my personal problems, because that just like, I'm supposed to man up, you know? Like I'm not supposed to be talking about those things. Because of the testosterone, it was harder to cry and like process like negative emotions such as like being sad, for example. I could like, it was more difficult to like get to the point of crying, and once I did, I could do it for hours with no release. Like I would feel the same afterward, if not worse.
Wow.
And eventually it just kept going down this downward spiral, and I just justified this in my head, like, oh, maybe I'm just not either, you know? Maybe I'm just like, maybe I'm non-binary. Maybe I'm neither male nor female. Maybe that's just what I am. but I kept struggling. And it wasn't until in my psychology class my junior year that I was towards the end of the course, I was learning about like parenting and childhood psychology and development, that I was like, it was like a whole new world to me. Like I knew absolutely nothing about any of this before. I knew that, well, maybe I might want to have kids one day, and I was told that I could potentially lose my ability to birth and conceive and such. But I was 13 years old. What 13-year-old is thinking about that?
Yeah, none. Yeah.
None.
Not
And
me.
I thought naively, because they never even brought up like fertility preservation options for me. It was never presented as an option ever. And so I just had some naive preconceptions about it. Like, well, I mean, if we already have this technology, then it must be pretty advanced, right? Like, they could just like extract the egg cells out of my body, and I could just have like a surrogate. And I didn't know that it was a lot more complex than that. That I might not be able to do that. And even if I was, like, it's a pretty arduous process. Like, you have to go on a pretty strict like hormone regimen, like high amounts of estrogen. It's extremely tough on the body, both surrogacy and egg extraction and freezing and such.
Was there a particular moment where you decided, okay, I'm taking these steps and I'm going to detransition, or was it a gradual journey?
Yeah, it was after after that course, it was like, wow, this is something that I want to do one day. I want to have kids of my own. Like, this is so special. I didn't realize just how special this was. But am I going to be able to after years of being on hormones? And that was a scary thought to me. But it was also like deeply painful that I'm not going to be able to breastfeed. I won't even have the option as an adult because of a decision that I was unable to make as a kid. I'll never know what that's like. And that was what took me out of it, because it was so immensely painful. I couldn't keep living on like that. I couldn't keep doing it. And just a few weeks afterward, I took my last testosterone shot, and after that, I just kind of laid in bed for a week or so, because I didn't know what to do with myself.
And what did your parents say when you told them, I need to go back the other direction?
I think they kind of saw it coming.
Yeah.
Just gradually over time. But they did their best to help me. They didn't push back on it, of course. But they were shocked. They probably thought I wasn't going to make it, honestly. Like, I didn't even know how I was going to pick up my life after that. But
here you are today, courageous, a lot of people's young girls' heroes, and you are making a difference worldwide.
I hope so.
What do you credit to giving you the courage and the hope to make that decision and give hope to a lot of other people?
I mean, I think part of it is that I've always been a really stubborn person, like from very early childhood. Like, my parents would always get very frustrated with me about several things.
I can relate to that. Sometimes stubbornness helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
But it's a blessing in this instance. When I initially stopped transitioning, just like talking about the regret of what I'd been through, and how transitioning harmed me, how like the pain of how much I regretted it, and how I felt like I was duped by my doctors. I was getting attacked left and right by members of the trans community. And these are people that celebrated me more and more the further I went into it, especially with like after my mastectomy, which they called top surgery, and they seemed so happy for me. And then once I was out of it and it caused me pain, just talking about that was enough to make them turn their backs on me.
Is that
which
still
hurt.
the case today?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's even worse now than I'm like on the stage and such. But it hurt then so much because I thought these were people who loved me. These are people who I thought I was as part of a group of. And now I was being rejected just because of my personal experience with it. And these people said some really rough things to me. Like there were a few people who were like continually harassing me. There was one person who told me like it was quite a few people actually told me like it was all my fault. Like I'm stupid. That I should have known better. That I should have known exactly what I was doing to myself at 13 years old. There was even a person who tried to like gaslight me into thinking like that we had a conversation about this. That I should have known the difference between real gender dysphoria, really being an actual transgender person.
Like you're a fraud to begin with is kind of what
we
they're
had
saying.
no such conversation. There was not. We never had a conversation like that. And this is all coming from people who never actually went on these treatments or like were very early in the process of doing so. And I think like a large part of it came from the fact that a lot of them are afraid. Like they see somebody who is seemingly in the most ideal conditions, like transitioning young, supportive family and friends and such, and they were not only jealous but also afraid because they'd see like it still was a failure for me. And so they kind of decided to take it out on me. And like after some time, like at first I like gave in to their will to basically shut me up because I wanted to stop dealing with all the mean stuff they were saying to me. And I was just 16 years old. Like it was a lot for me.
Yeah.
I was just being bombarded with hate from this group that I was once a part of that once supported me.
So first you abided by it and then
and then I just started to wake up slowly and slowly. This is what I guess some feminists call peaking, and that like you see the reality of the situation of transitioning in general, like the community, the treatments, the actual act of transitioning, and I just couldn't turn a blind eye to it, and I just couldn't shut up. Because, like, I knew there were other people out there like me who were going through the exact same thing of being put on these awful treatments after being in a very vulnerable mindset or at a very vulnerable age and having been lied to there by the doctors and then coming out of it with regret and then being attacked by a community that was once theirs.
And that's why you're speaking out about something else, which is the healthcare industry.
Yes.
Tell us about this lawsuit that you have filed against Kaiser Permanente and why you felt the need to do that.
Yeah, from the very beginning of my detransition, I knew that I wanted to pursue a lawsuit, but I didn't think that it was a possibility even. I thought like, well, my mom and dad they were required to sign off on these procedures, and it was all consented to on paperwork. And, well, how would I even make it? There's just no way. And so I just I thought about it for a little bit, and then I gave up on it until like I started speaking up. I just kind of shied away from that. But Harmeet Dillon, who works with Center for American Liberty, reached out to me one day through email, and I spoke to her a little bit. I was still 17 at the time, so I couldn't like legally do anything on my own. But once it was like just before my 18th birthday, and we were just kind of discussing what my options were and whether I was interested in a lawsuit. And I mean, right away I just saw like how incredible she is, and like all the work that Center for American Liberty and Dillon Law has done. And how could I not take that opportunity? Because I not only want to get justice for myself, because I was wronged by my doctors. This was malpractice. This was fraud on their part. And now, like, they have been refusing to take care of me, really. I'm dealing with some pretty gnarly complications. But I was also, like, thinking about other people. Like, I don't think a whole lot of other people are really getting this opportunity right now for that. And I want other people to have the chance to get justice for what happened to them.
Chloe, this lawsuit has been in national news for the last few weeks. What do you really want the outcome of this to be? I mean, you kind of touched on that you want justice for more than just yourself, but with people seeing all these headlines, what is the outcome you want for holding the healthcare industry accountable?
I want them to stop doing this to kids. I want them to be held accountable for the damage that they're causing to these children, to their bodies, their minds, their families. Mm-hmm. They should never, ever be performed on children, and I hope it never will be ever again.
Mm. Well, I think that's a good place to end with some encouragement for people, because we talked a little bit about, last week, that if you can have the courage to do this journey that you have done, and I just want to stop and say, Chloe, we admire you so much, your courage, the fire inside of you to speak truth, the fact that you're speaking truth to power and exposing these lies. Thank you for doing that. I hear from so many people. When you came out to Virginia Beach, we heard from so many people, parents, students. We heard from parents saying, Chloe's my daughter's hero, So, well, let me ask you, what are some of the most encouraging conversations you've had when you talk to people that are affected by what you're doing?
Well, I spoke to the mom of Sage.
Michelle Blair.
Yeah, and she told me, she's, showing her daughter some of my videos, and her daughter really looks up to me, which is really sweet. I didn't expect that, actually. And recently, I was in Massachusetts for a speaking event with TPUSA, and there was a father who came up to me who said that he's struggling with this with his daughter, and she's he's shown her some of my content, and it's helped her to slowly sort of lean towards the path of desistance. At first she was very adamant about this, and she had a very strained relationship with her father. She rejected him. She swore never to be around him, and now she's warming up to him. They spend time together, and she's even said to him, I guess I'm starting to see that this is something that I don't have to live this way. It's just incredible.
And how would it have been different for you? Not that everything would have changed, but if you would have had one voice like yourself out there, that when you're online, social media, you saw that.
I mean, it's really hard to say what could have been, but I feel like if there are more people like me, like my detransition friends, a lot of them were kind of offbeat people. A lot of them didn't really have a whole lot of friends in school, but they had they're cool people, and just seeing somebody who I can relate to who's speaking out against this, I feel like it could have helped. Just somebody who is young, mm-hmm. and is kind of just their own person, and also just showing courage and just talking about the truth of the matter. I feel like it could have helped me greatly, and I'm just trying to be that kind of role model, I guess, that I wish I had back then.
Chloe, on that note, what can people do to help you get your message out, the truth that people need to hear?
I think this is a battle that everybody, as many people as possible, should be involved in, because it's not about politics. It's not about some obscure ideology. This is something that's affecting entire institutions, namely healthcare and psychiatry and our schools. And it's affecting children, adolescents, their families. It's tearing them apart. And it's not something that we can look away from anymore, because it's everywhere. And it needs to be stopped in its tracks.
Thank you, Chloe. I can't tell you how powerful that was, and just how moving your story is. And I don't know about all of you listening, but I cannot hear that and not be moved to action. So please share this with your family members, your church members, school officials. People need to hear this. Chloe, before we close out today, tell us, you said you're starting a new podcast. Tell us about that and how they can check it out.
Not really a new podcast, but I'm doing an interview series of other people who have transitioned and detransitioned. I've got a YouTube channel of my own. I have the same username across all my platforms. Twitter's my main one. I also use Instagram. My username is. I should probably have this up on the screen because some people
we'll put
get
it up
kind
on
of
the screen,
confused as to
absolutely,
like
for our YouTube viewers.
the spelling. But CHOOOCOLE, or you can just find me by looking up Chloe Cole.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us and taking the time again to just, I know it's not easy to share that, and you do it over and over. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, for joining Speak Up Virginia. Remember to share our Speak Up Virginia playlist and give us a review on Spotify and Apple to help us reach more people with these important messages. And we'll see you next time. Remember, we are stronger when we speak together.